We're live.
Got it. Thank you. You think I got it? We'll call the meeting of the Bond Implementation Oversight Committee for March 23rd, 2023 to order. And I think just go around the room and do introductions. There's some new faces in the room. This way, the mayor.
Mickey Barney, City Councilor, Ward 8.
Mike Niblock, Fire Chief.
Josh Eggleston, Chief Financial Officer.
Brian Martin, Deputy Public Works Director.
Karen Vincent, Street Community. Stilling, City Manager. Bob Courtwright, Community.
Brandon Lucas, Street Maintenance Operations Group Manager.
Alan Dannon, Public Works Engineer.
Legislative Management and Budget Office.
Dan Atchison, City Attorney.
Julie Warnicki, Transportation Planning Manager.
Great. Does it look like we have any members of the public here? And I don't think we got any requests via email that I'll see. So no action items, and we will go on into the management update information items. So we'll have an update on initial projects. Who's leading that conversation?
Let's kind of jump around the pink, just where we're at on the fire equipment purchase.
Thank you. Swallow that bite of sandwich before I chew. So I'm just going to give a really brief update. I've got some photographs to pass around real quick for everybody if you want to peek through those. Our pre-bond purchase fire engine was delivered to Eugene last Thursday. That's the first picture in the packet. We expect it to be in Salem here by the end of April and begin training our crews. Hope to have it serviced by the 1st of June.
Why does it go to Eugene?
Upfit, so all of the cabinetry, design, where we're going to mount all our tools is done by Choose Fire Equipment, who we bought the truck from. So it came from Wisconsin, was driven out to Eugene, and all of them will follow that procedure. The ladder truck that was a pre-bond purchase is scheduled to have its final completion and factory inspection in May. Will be delivered in Eugene in June, and upfit and training and in service by August or September of this year. For the bond apparatus, we've basically purchased all the apparatus which I reported last meeting. And we are expecting the ARF truck, Aircraft Firefighting Rescue Truck, to be delivered by next May 2024. We do have an existing ARF truck that will function in that purpose when the planes begin landing later this year. So we're prepared for that. 2 ladder trucks will be arriving. The next 2 ladder trucks will be arriving in August of 2024. 16 fire engines will be arriving in September, October, November of 2024. Heavy rescue in August of 25. The air rehab vehicle in September of 25. 2 wildland fire engines will be in fall of 24, and 2 ambulances summer of 24. And those are dependent on the chassis delivery. Whenever you order commercial chassis, sometimes they're behind and it takes a while to get them. We have identified 7 properties for each new station location. We are going through the vetting process of really digging into if they're viable properties. So at some point, probably this fall, we'll be bringing back some recommendations to this group for which properties we would bring forward to purchase for station construction for both Station 12 and Station 8.
You said 7 properties total or 7 properties?
7 for each one. We've identified
So
7
14
properties in a quarter-mile circle that would potentially, then there's things like wetland issues and there's all kinds of, who owns it. So we're just kind of delving down into that stuff. I would say we've got 2 or 3 properties for each location that are ideal. So we're not constrained by having to go in and buy 3 or 4 homes or like eminent domain like we've done before. So there's big properties that serve our needs.
Great.
The last couple of pictures in that group are, just wanted to point out that we are switching to electric Johnson Light tools. So right now we have gasoline powered 4-cycle engines that have a pretty significant carbon footprint. They run on hydraulic fluid. We did some extensive testing earlier this year in preparation for the bond to pass, and it did, so that's great. On some electric tools, they are absolutely fantastic. They're quicker, they're cleaner. We cut an entire car apart with one battery. And the new cars have that boron steel in them and lots of more steel and safety measures that are difficult to cut. So these tools are, we have Hamatro now, it's hydraulic power, so this is the next version up. So those will be all electric. And then our fans that we have on our ladder trucks and our heavy rescues are also gasoline powered, and we are switching to electric powered fans. They run 45 minutes on a battery, and then you just plug them into the electric source. So they're very portable. So you can take and get initial ventilation in your fire building very quickly, and they're made in Albany. So it's a local purchase, and the dealer that we bought the Hamatro tools from is a local dealer as well. Those can be used underwater. So they're very, in extreme circumstances, we have to cut into a car or whatever, it's underwater, they'll work. So they're pretty high tech technology. They've come a long way. So I just wanted to highlight that we are looking at ways to reduce our carbon footprint. It's a small reduction, I realize, because we don't run these motors every day, but it is a reduction, and it is moving towards the electrification of where we can take advantage of that. The last thing I wanted to say was we did a little more research on Portland's electric fire truck. It's being provided by Pierce, who is our apparatus manufacturer. Portland doesn't actually own that truck, so they didn't buy it. They're doing some kind of a trial period with Pierce. Pierce still owns the truck. So I've asked my folks to have a conversation with our salespeople about, is there an opportunity for us sometime in the future to have a trial truck? There's infrastructure that has to go in place to do that, but I still don't think they're ready for prime time, but it would be nice to figure out what are the constraints in a real life experiment. So that's my report.
What's the plan for deploying the new equipment to the various stations around the city? Is it based on, how many engine hours are on a particular truck, or is it based on usage at a particular station? So we get this, the new equipment there first. And
So
stuff
yeah,
around.
so the brand new truck, we're getting one engine and one ladder. Those will be put into the fleet, and we will take the truck with the most mileage out and put it in reserve status. We try to balance the mileage across the entire fleet. So, for example, Station 3 is our busiest station, and they've got a placard on the truck that says Engine 3. Well, we can slide that placard out, put another truck in there, and slide it back in. So we try to balance the mileage across the entire engine fleet. As they come in, we'll do that. We'll see 8 trucks at once. It takes us a little while to get 8 trucks, in service and
Sort of jigsaw around.
but it's the entire fleet. So eventually they'll all be new trucks, and they'll all be the same, which is great for training. You can train people on one truck. In fact, the truck that we're getting this spring is so similar to the trucks we're ordering. Once we train on that truck, we probably won't have to train on the other trucks. So they'll already be trained on how to use that truck, and it'll move around.
Thanks, Keith. Any other questions? Thank you. Thanks. What's next? Parking lot?
Yeah, I got a few project updates. I need to work on the, so I don't have to go Digital brown parking lots wanted to talk about. That is one of our first and fastest track projects.
The most popular project on the bond list, I think, and
One of the reasons why we picked it is because
underwater dog park, and it is underwater. Now it's done.
Put it right there. It could be underwater. So we picked that one because one is popular and two, it's our best opportunity to get some more water away. So just quickly the progress that we've done there, graphical survey. Subsurface issues that we need to contend with, and we've got our designer AKS on board under our control of record contract. So the intent is try to get ourselves ready to start that construction this fall, as we talked about last meeting, doing construction in parts during the summertime. So that's what we're doing construction. The intent is to get out there and do as much as we can this fall, and then catch it back up in the spring. The Gilchrist is the next project I wanted to just give a brief update on, we talked about it last month. I have an appointment with our project manager to go over the final plan specifications, and that's for next week. Rod's also doing their final review. So the project is scheduled to advertise on April 25th. And we'll open those bids on May 23rd. So looking forward to seeing how it impacts the cost projection.
So Alan, the number one question I got after yesterday's speech was regarding the bill press and my use of the term cycle track.
Yeah.
And I knew that that was gonna be, people were gonna be like, what are you talking about? Races? What? Could you talk to us a little bit about what that means, how it got into the project, and, you know, just talk to us a little bit about that whole
Sure,
thing.
and it is the picture that we shared last, I guess, by email, between our meeting is attached here. But really what we're talking about there is a separated bike facility, so it's out of the street, separated from traffic by the curb, ladder strip where street trees or quality is. And then there's a 10-foot wide path on both sides of the street that
both sides.
provides room for pedestrians and bicycles.
Oh, I just spoke yesterday. I thought it was a two-way, a single two-way.
It is two-way, but it's in both directions. So
Okay. Okay, I was thinking of some, okay.
yeah, I accidentally spoiled your announcement speech because I was sitting with Corey.
Oh, was he excited?
Association, he was excited about it.
Oh, good.
I was like, oh, I should've waited. But anyway, that's what the facility is, and it was a bit of a trick to incorporate it in this project because of the industrial nature out there. There's a lot of driveways, so safety's a consideration. That worked into our right of way acquisition. That's why I'm trying to make the facility as compact as possible. That was in there was kind of what we had to balance here, but luckily, relatively narrow travel lanes and a small shy distance between those travel lanes.
So there's no bike lanes on the pavement. They're all the cycle track.
The other thing about a cycle track is you can bring more detail pictures. Where we cross major streets, those tracks will dive down to the street into where the ped crossing is. So they all cross in one location, back out to the outside part of it. It does come down to the street level where we're crossing like an intersection. I can show you what that looks like, 22nd Street.
Okay, that'd be great.
So this, by taking the 5-foot bike lane out of the street, putting it on the sidewalk, we're able to build it within the same way, right? Just move it behind the stormwater strips.
Totally protected.
Totally protected. It's a nice option. I look forward to seeing it.
Excellent.
Mickey has a question.
I do have a question. I was wondering, I mean, I think this is absolutely fantastic, but I'm wondering how, under our current design standards, how we could incorporate something like this with something moving forward.
Yeah, this was actually, it's an alternate street section.
Okay,
So the typical street section out there had the bike lanes and the street. Councilor Anderson at one point. Driveways with lineators out something. And so that's a great. Becomes an alternate street section. We're going through the bond projects last year, the pipe coming. That's one thing, so we got some other future projects as well. Things like this. We could try and help, like, and save all at the same time. Everything in a safer manner.
so even though we haven't transportation system master plan yet, we can go ahead and start putting things like this in projects that we're planning.
That's how we approach this one. I think we have the liberty to do that. When we got something in the TSP and we say, this is what the TSP will look like in the future, and developers. Right now, it's hard. We can't make developers do this. Our TSP. We have to really do it.
Okay, so that's the distinction, is that this, our project, Okay. that's helpful.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering what the difference was. Okay.
I mean, they can propose open in 3 sections as well. Sometimes they do, but it's not.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, it surprised me that there was a cycle track because geeking out on the TSP, I was like, well, here's what a collector street looks like, and it is bike lanes. So I was really pleased to see that. Yeah, that's so. It's good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Can we stay on this subject?
Of course.
Okay, so I know that 12th Street repaving is included in the bond later. Will the bike lanes that are on 12th and 13th, which are kind of that couplet going through there, will they connect at all with the bike lanes here on?
So McGill Crest.
In theory, they should, right?
connects, so that they
Yeah.
should,
Um, Fantastic. So I would love to, when we go to redo those pavements on 12th, I don't think 13th is in there, but 12th is for sure, but I'd love to see if we can make those as protected as we can. So that, then you're gonna have this whole corridor from the 12th Street Promenade and Union Street Bikeway. If you can connect it all the way out there, being protected in that way, I think it would be really fabulous to try and get that corridor. And I don't know what that looks like. I know 12th Street is rather wide and we have parking on both sides. And a bike lane already there. So I'm trying to see if we can do, work the magic like you guys did with this project on looking at the space we have and trying to figure out how can we make it work so that we do have, as protected as we can. I'm looking forward.
Right now, that connection is, it's a, directly on 13th, and you go around that corner on Pringle, that's up to 13th, and it's not a great place to ride.
Yeah.
I don't recall what the pay.
Yeah.
I think it's a big thing. Mr. Davidson says the information on potential grant opportunity for smaller street sweepers last week, and we're actually working with that process now. We'll see that council.
That's on the agenda.
On the agenda.
Yeah,
on 27.
So you do the chair dance now. This is what we do the chair dance.
If we were successful with that, that will allow us then to even put money. One thing about McGill Crest is because it's a it's easier to do something
Yeah.
like this, right? We're going to pavement, we have projects and sidewalks in place. It's hard
Find space.
to get
Yeah.
here.
Right.
Operators. Doesn't mean there's nothing to do.
So I wanted to say one more thing, and it is not about bike lanes. It's actually about manhole covers.
About the sunken ones all over town that you feel like you're
No,
gonna fall in and
not
never
at
find out
all,
of?
not at all. I wanted to just give the folks in the room who are working on the Gilchrist, just a heads up. We were out visiting the tribes,
Oh, that's right.
and the tribes are really interested in functional art or functional placemaking. And they have been wanting this one gentleman, what was his name? Okay. He has this idea of coming up with a Salem design for manhole covers that includes some of the designs from the Kalapuya people. And I thought it was a brilliant idea. And we were talking about the sacred space that the land that is over by the airport in the McGilcrest area. And I thought, oh, I wonder if this would be a really wonderful time if we're redoing it. Could we, maybe work with the tribes on some way to bring a tribal aspect into the project? I thought it was a very unique, functional placemaking idea to come up with manhole covers. I don't know what the street looks like. Josh is laughing, so that's a good sign. So I don't know, I just wanted to put that out there. I thought it was a wonderful idea.
think we got experts, with this first phase of Gilchrist that Alan was talking about, the intersection. Like you said, the plans are ready to go on. Challenge. But
Yes.
There could be opportunities. I know some agencies have.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
Do we have a?
And that area out there is very significant to them culturally because of the campus buildings and things. Yeah.
This could be something we could ask the Art Commission for help with in terms of jurying and a collaboration with Kimberly Fitzgerald and the tribes. So I'll just start thinking about that with them.
The good thing about a manhole cover is, or a person hole cover or access cover, or whatever we're calling it today, is they can be replaced.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's not like, oh, we can't.
We can't do it.
You know, at some point in the future, we could come in and replace.
So this isn't really an agenda item, but it's kind of related to all the things you're talking about. I would like to maybe have a quarterly report to council on a bond update. And I think that, and then maybe highlight just different aspects, we could go over everything, of course, and I'm assuming it would be Josh, somebody coordinating that, but I think that back to the cycle tracks, I think that would be a really great first project to highlight. Maybe highlight the Gilchrist and the cycle track, something like that in a quarterly report where you come and actually talk to council. So the rest of the councilors are getting the kind of information we're getting. It's not as detailed and not in the same frequency, of course, but I think a quarterly report to them, help them know what's going on with the fire fleet and that kind of thing.
At the council.
And a council meeting, yeah, just a quick presentation, you know.
And could we also have like this may be for you, Courtney, but after we have that update at council, maybe shrunk down even farther into a paragraph or something that the councilors could take to neighborhood associations
Even
to
as
kind
a,
of even delineate it more.
or even as a flyer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are doing media releases when there's a substantive, like we did a media release about the bond sale. And we are due to put together a media release about what you're hearing today. So it's easy enough to just reformat that into a one-pager bulletin. And we also have talked about whether this kind of an update would be worthy of a work session, or if you wanted it as a special orders of business, but we can talk through those options.
I don't think we're at a work session level at this point. To me, it's just I think if you could just do regular updates.
Information report and the presentation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We would want some sort of report with it. Yeah, so people have something to take away, but nothing, I don't want to make it like super complex, but just the highlights, so they're up to speed. It's very- this is, they need to hear it directly from you and not secondhand from us. And absolutely. Cool. What else do we have on the updates on initial projects?
Just wanted to share one more thing, although it's not related to a specific project. We talked about last time, one of the challenges that we're facing is just having the resources to deliver on these.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we've done is we issued a request to the consultant. Essentially looking for project and program managers. Work alongside us and take some of these projects on. We got really good response to that. I expect to be on board somewhere around
So these are firms and not people?
10. These are firms that propose specifically for most cases, so that we can say, okay, this person is qualified to do a project. Or maybe a bucket of those things. So that's good news for us. It's a challenging hiring environment. Some of those other resources on the side of this. So we've got a number of other projects where we're bringing design teams on board, and so having these.
Is that across the board for all the projects or particular project types that you're looking for?
It's pretty much across the board, but primarily transportation parts. So, because that's where most.
This isn't new. We've on Deer Island, we use a consultant project manager. So we've got another one that So they become an extension of our staff. That vacancies that are starting to help ramp up. To get through.
Great. Are we done then with item A?
Yep.
All right. So B, outreach, project selection, and project scoring strategy.
I'll go ahead and kick this off. So we have numerous buckets, funding buckets. One of them is pedestrian safety project. Sidewalk improvement. Third is sidewalk replacements. And then the fourth is progress of trails and paths. So our focus today was going to be to start with the safety crossing. We can walk through what we've done in the past to make projects. We have a range list from applications and submitting over time. We're trying to put some of those in. Sidewalk infill. We thought we'd share what we did back in the 2008. We know things are changing, times are changing. 20 years ago. So we have more things to consider. So things that we didn't necessarily look at. We thought it'd be good to have a baseline of what we did before, and discuss how can we improve forward. The third category, if we have time, we'll start talking about sidewalk replacements. And that one has its own little trick to it. And I say that because through the years, I've done some research on kind of changing priorities. And, quite a few years back, took a step to put responsibility on property owners. Criteria that so the sidewalk had to be constructed after 1992. Couldn't have issues that were street tree causing a problem. And so Brandon is here because he's been working on a program, for years. Process and to help us with questions on, where are we at today? What have we kind of done in the past? And then also open it up to, okay, how do we want to do this one forward? So anyway, kind of roll it all together. There's a lot to talk about. I don't expect that we're going to come out of this meeting, but we're going to do this one that way. But it's a good start to discuss how we go forward. And it's of course a huge part of it is comprehension.
I have a question, Brian, about whether something is a replacement or if you consider infill. Like I know out in my area, we have a lot of asphalt sidewalks that really aren't sidewalks at all. They're just kind of narrow paths that are we inherited. Would we consider that a replacement? Like when if we're like along Sunny, for instance, is on the east side of 45th, is that when there's like an asphalt something over there? Is that a replacement or is that an infill?
That's a good question. I think we can talk more about that.
Okay.
But, I think both ways.
Right.
There's areas where there's nothing. That's definitely infill. If you have something, but it's not a standard concrete sidewalk.
Yeah, because it's not like you're gonna be able to go out there and take out the asphalt and just pour concrete. You're gonna have to reconstruct that. I mean, if we were to ever do that, it's a pretty significant project.
And that's one thing we'll talk about with these infill projects. And one thing we experienced back in 2008, we didn't have near as much money in the budget back then. There were places where to infill sidewalk, you had to any law by right away. You could have a project that has a great need and is highly ranked.
Right.
Something like that, or smaller ones that you can do easily, less cost. There was one that I think to this day is still not out off of Rush College. Wilkes area along the school, there's a short segment, it's the sidewalk. It's hillside in order to put that segment in, which is adjacent to a school, it checks all the boxes. I think it was over $1 million or $2 million
Well, we
a long
just,
time ago, so.
we just did an updated estimate as part of this 5.5.
Yeah.
And so,
You thought it was gonna be like.
well, back in 2008, it was $1 million or $2 million. But,
Thanks.
so those are some of the.
Should have done it then. I just wanted to jump into that because the sidewalks, going from your asphalt pathway to a sidewalk usually involves curb, gutter, drainage, and comes an astronomical cost like that. Something that I've seen, and I'm curious, you talk about kind of innovative approaches, is in some places where there is adequate, basically natural drainage, is you just build a concrete sidewalk at grade to replace it. Is that the sort of thing that you think about, or?
I mean, I think you certainly could. I mean, just, it doesn't mean it has to be perfect or perfect. It's really trying to make sometimes it's an action.
It would be interesting to see the gradation, I guess, or the span of like the 5 million versus, you know, the 2.5 million option versus the 1 million option. I mean, I'm not saying for that particular project, but just what is available to us? I don't even know what's available as far as options, other than the beautiful sidewalk that we see in our areas that we have already.
I think Julie's gonna have a little bit of information, but I definitely don't want to just go out and start asking people for it. Start having people provide, and there's an effort that costing. Cost. $60,000, and then we can get all those things.
That's what we'll be doing, is making recommendations. Council, this group will, like, what's the length of that? You know, for a couple of big projects, or you know, go for smaller projects, or you know, just have to be given like this. You know, that makes no sense.
Okay, so without further ado, these are the buckets that we're basically talking about from the bond, and their dollar amounts. Sidewalk replacement is a little bit different, but I still have it in there. So I want to go back to, you know, what did we do with the 2008 bond, which was somewhat similar. We had these buckets that you see here. I'm going to focus on the pedestrian crossing and the missing sidewalk and bike lanes to schools and parks, and what our process was at that time. We did receive council direction on a criteria and process in February of 2009, so pretty quickly after the election. Now, there's a lot of words here, but basically our process was we went out to the community right up front and asked for ideas. For both of those buckets combined, we received about 150 project proposals. We then we took that approval criteria that council had approved in February, and we did sort of separate tracks. So we separated the pedestrian crossings from the missing sidewalks. We developed scope and cost estimates. We had a public hearing through the Citizens Advisory Traffic Commission. We then came to the bond committee to get their recommendation, had council public hearings, and then final approval. So the crossing one was a little bit easier to, wrap our arms around. So that process took about a year. So the public hearing at council was in April of 2010. The missing sidewalk bike lane one took a little bit longer, and we didn't get to that public hearing until December of 2011. And then design and delivery, typically if we don't need a lot of right of way, design can be done 1 year and then construction the following year. When you get right of way in there, it takes longer. I think our last projects in these buckets were delivered in 2017. We sort of divided it into packages. So what's different now from that? A few things. One, we have the pedestrian crossings program that was developed in about 2018, and council approved the scoring criteria for that in 2019. We've received almost 400 requests to date at 165 unique locations. Only a handful of those have been funded for construction, but those are included in that number. So what we've done at the moment is we've taken out the sort of top, we've taken the top 10% of those locations, which is about 16. And we're getting ready to start doing more scoping on those so that we can develop a recommendation from those.
When you say top 10%, do you mean in terms of requests or score?
Score.
Score, okay.
Yes, and so, and then the scoring process, takes into consideration schools, traffic volumes, speed, pedestrian volumes, crossing distance, equity, pedestrian crashes, and lighting. So it's a sort of a pretty involved scoring process. Now, what we'll find sometimes is that something might score really high, but the solution is not really within the scope of the program. So I'll use as an example, the intersection of Reed Road and Fairview Industrial Drive. Okay, that score is really high, but really that needs a traffic signal. And, it's not really within this bucket approach. So that gets sort of moved off into other needs that we need to be paying attention to. So I brought a list with me of those top 16 locations that I'll pass around in a moment. I also have a map that I'll be showing some of this stuff on. Regarding the missing sidewalks, what we did not have in 2008 was a good inventory of where we didn't have sidewalks. We just recently, this Cyclomedia contract, collected inventory on all of our sidewalk assets, and we now know that we have about 300 miles of missing sidewalk. We have that mapped, and we can then overlay that with other issues like proximity to schools and transit stops and things like that.
So we do have that map.
Yes, in a moment we will get to the map.
You want to share what that contract was?
We did a contract with Cyclomedia to go around and do terrestrial LiDAR detection to collect data on most of our transportation assets. The purpose of this is to feed our, we're transitioning to a new way of managing our assets called CityWorks. And we didn't really have good transportation data. So it was decided that this was the most cost-effective way to populate our asset management program going forward. So capture it about as you're doing.
Yeah, it's basically survey data that's like beautiful, kind of like take Google Earth, but apply X, Y, and Z coordinates.
And it,
Or on the location.
yeah, and we can use it to measure things. We can go in and we can look at what the camera was looking at, and then we paid them to extract certain of those data and feed them into the asset database. So our GIS people have been very busy. I think the data collection just finished it was done in the fall. The data extraction maybe finished in January. This is all pretty new stuff.
Is this the same system where our trees are mapped?
I don't think we were able to map.
I think mine did something different for trees, but I would guess there's overlap.
Because I saw the GIS the other day and they were showing me the map of the trees and that you could tell the particular, like what type of tree it was, what the status was.
That's what it did.
Okay,
All very cool.
it was very cool.
Yeah. So I mean, this is still rolling out, but it's very important, not only for this effort, but also for the active transportation system plan. To have data that we can locationally show. So anyway, that's a new thing that we have. And then on the sidewalk replacement, that was not a category in 2008. However, we have, for many years been collecting customer requests and ranking them, and we have over 1,700 documented requests for service that we have in a spreadsheet that Brandon manages.
Now, are these subject to the ADA circle thing that we always have to consider in terms of sidewalk replacement, out from the core.
I mean, I think that's open for discussion.
Okay.
I know we've had some conversations. Like around that. How we go about things.
Yeah,
So there's
one gets a lot of attention when it starts to core. It's like we never get outside of Ward 1.
Someday,
Someday.
so we'll get all the way out to northeast.
we do have a responsibility.
Of course.
So those are things that will always have ongoing. Also. So how we get there will be a good discussion.
Okay.
So before we get to the map, I just want to bring up some key considerations that at the staff level we've been thinking about. One is around equity. And there's different ways of looking at and defining equity. I hung up on the map on the walls here just for your
Yeah,
information.
I've been enjoying those. I'm like, oh, that's awesome.
So the one on the right is the percent Hispanic and or non-white populations. So it's by census tract and the percentages are in there. Darker colors have higher percentages. The map on the left is the poverty status. And both of these come from American Community Survey data. But I'm just showing this as just one way to illustrate that there are different ways that we're going to have to look at equity and how we define it. You know, one possibility is that you make a decision to only invest in areas that are defined as traditionally underserved. However we end up defining that. Another option is to choose projects maybe based on other issues like access to transit, access to parks and schools, and then overlay that with the equity consideration to make sure that a certain percentages are in these areas that are traditionally underserved. So these are all things that we've been like spending a lot of time thinking about, talking about, not at a landing point of even making a recommendation, but I just wanted to bring that up. Then the next consideration I have up there sort of sounds weird, but basically looking at where locations are in proximity to other bond projects. And this is for two reasons. One is for efficiency. Are there areas where we can combine delivery to save money? And then the other part of it is creating continuous accessibility routes. So where we're coming in and we're doing a pavement or in our project and we have to upgrade all the curb ramps. Well, it's sort of silly if somebody, gets up on a curb ramp and then there's a missing gap, right? So are there places that we can bring those things together? The next bullet there, really this ties into ADA type of priorities, which is access to transit. And we are recommending focusing on the core transit network. Public schools, parks, areas of public accommodation and social services. And then the last one gets at what we were talking about earlier in terms of, do we take the highest ranked project if costs $5 million out of a $6 million bucket, or do we try to do a bunch that are $700,000? And so, where do we go with that? So part of that is then minimizing high cost triggers. And that may mean, avoiding ones that have any stormwater, or maybe you don't necessarily want to avoid all of them, but definitely ones that maybe have a huge retaining wall or run through a huge white oak that they're going to have to, do something really creative to get around. So these are the things that we are recommending be key considerations. I will say that I'm just going to put this out there. I don't know that it's within our capacity to score absolutely every need that we have in the city, because we have, 300 miles of missing sidewalk. And so I think we need to use these key considerations to narrow down to a smaller bucket that can then be evaluated, cost estimated, et cetera. So, okay, this is where I have my link to my map. We'll see if it works, but what I'm showing on here is the top tier of pedestrian crossing locations. We did a preliminary sampling of potential sidewalk infill projects, focusing on those key considerations, came up with 24 different locations, and we had those estimated. And the cost is at about $20 million. So that's already more than twice the size of the missing sidewalk bucket. And then some other data. So let's see if this link, have it open already. Okay, so I'm going to turn on. So start by turning on this layer. So this is the top 16 scoring pedestrian crossing locations. Various locations around the city. Here, slowly, is all of the missing sidewalks. So that's about 300 miles. Now, I think, well, to me, it's sort of obvious that we're not going to be infilling sidewalks in some of the major, arterials where we really need a full street improvement project. Using as an example, Fisher Road, that's its own standalone project.
So it's interesting, to back to my earlier question to Brian, it looks like we consider an asphalt path a sidewalk.
Well,
I'm seeing Sunnyview along there that doesn't.
I will say that this is the data from the from Cyclomedia data collection. We have found that there are some, it's a machine learning, right? So there are some mistakes where maybe vegetation was covering something. And so, yes, there are areas where we call it a sidewalk here, but in that list of 24 projects that we had estimated, I saw that when engineering did the estimating, they pulled out 2 of them and they said, well, these ones have asphalt, paths, and so they may fall into that other bucket. So that's still a variable. I'm going to turn off the missing sidewalk just because it clutters things. So I think I'm going to turn off the crossings here. So these are the bond projects that are lines as opposed to just points around town. So this was one of the things we were using to look at.
So things like pavement rehab or reconstruction.
Yeah, that's where those. So we use that as well as access to transit and some other things. Just, this is really a sampling. It was not intended to be all inclusive. Really, a lot of this was to see what the costs ended up being. And this was using the costs, for doing the actual full sidewalk and the curve, not the, just putting in a paved path or something.
What's the red?
The red are the locations that we identified as potential candidates. Those are those 24 that we got cost estimated for. So, as an example, let's see if I can find it.
So the missing sidewalk button that cluttered everything, that's the 300 miles.
Yes.
Okay, so that was not,
Yeah.
yes,
That was the 300 miles. This is the 24 individual segments that we thought might be worthy of, sort of zooming in on. So let me, or getting estimated to start with. So as an example, out near Silverton Road. So, along 17th, approaching that intersection that we're going to be rebuilding, there's a missing section of sidewalk on the west side of the road. There is a little missing section here on Silverton Road. That's the big white oak tree. So it's sort of expensive. Going out 30th, you would have continuous sidewalks up here. What happens if I turn this on? On the east side of the street, you would have continuous sidewalks from Silverton up here, which then gets you to Northgate Park, if we filled in this one little gap on the east side of the street. So we were trying to look at things like that, where, if you did this little thing, it would open up a bigger extent. Let's see, what is this one here? We also have a map of let's see here. This is a 1/4 mile buffer to the core network of transit. So, the one we were just zooming in on 30th, you can see that's not within that. Does that rule it out? No, not necessarily, just an issue. We also have all the Chariots bus stops, which are shown in red, which is confusing because it's the same color. And, you know, and we get really fancy, this, I'm just gonna turn this on for kicks. Oh, wait, it didn't work. Yeah, there you go. Those are a 1/4 mile buffer to all of the transit stops. So that gets a little way too busy to look at. But these are this is the way we're starting to look at the data. So with that, minimize that, go back here. So talking a bit more about the sidewalk replacement. Our current thinking is to take that top take the 1,744 requests, narrow it down to 800. I'm not exactly sure where we came up with that number, but something less than 1,700. And once again, the key considerations we're looking at are the same equity questions that we've talked about, same issue with, you know, partnering with bond projects, continuous accessibility, same issues with ADA, access to key destinations, and maximizing benefit. So, you know, a potential process would be to, you know, seek council approval of criteria for both the sidewalk infill and the replacement, but continue to use the pedestrian safer crossing criteria for that category. I put in there, if we were going this route and seeking that council approval, we would want to early on pull out projects that could maybe be partnered with early bond projects, pavement projects in particular, so that we don't lose that opportunity for efficiency. And I think like Silverton Road is probably a good example of that. Then develop preliminary candidates at the staff level based on the criteria. Somewhere in there, we need to seek neighborhood association support. Because last time we did work through the Citizens Advisory Traffic Commission, I put that up there as one mechanism for getting additional input, coming back to this committee, of course, for a final recommendation to council.
Julie, I would like to see a step above all of those. Before we see council approval, I would like that process to go through this group.
Yes.
So like to inform that recommendation to council.
I assumed that, sorry.
Okay, I just.
No, I assume that we'd be working through this committee, but then need to get that full council approval.
But I think the recommendation can come, you know, via staff, but through this group.
Yes.
One thing with this is but a lot of this is based on stuff we already have versus going out and asking questions. And so that may be something to think about. That may have something to think about. I don't know that it almost feels like we want to have some type of public approach again, and not just start with, okay, this is what we have.
Oh, I absolutely think we need people to have an opportunity now that the bond is passed, that they have an opportunity to offer an idea. Okay, because before it was like, oh, do you want to offer us an idea that we know we can't afford to build?
Right.
Go for it.
Now we have money.
Right, now we have money, now it's a potential reality. And we committed during the selling of the bond package that there would be a public process, and that's the language we use. There would be a public process on these buckets. I'm 100% committed to considering all of those.
So I don't think we lose track of what we already have.
No,
Give
you
people
build
an
on it.
opportunity.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you have to do an entirely new thing, but people absolutely have to have the opportunity.
I think this is really helpful to say, hey, we've been talking about this for a long time. Based on all the other work that we've done, we have what we think are good priorities. This is something to react to, a place to start, but it doesn't limit us from having other good ideas about what's the best solution, or best investment.
Yeah.
I mean, so I'm hearing you guys say potentially different things, but I just want to make sure I understand. You know, one option is we go out early on and we say, we've been collecting a lot of data, we want to hear, you know, what other needs do you guys see, but we don't necessarily present to them, this is the top 16 safer crossing requests. We just open it up more broadly. Versus doing the work first so that we then have a list where we say, these are the top, you know, 16, you know, 50, whatever it is, and then ask for people's reaction to that.
What are your thoughts?
I mean, there's pluses and minuses to both, right? I mean, like, I think sometimes when you go in with, these are the 16, you know, whatnot, which is fabulous work that we've, you know, a lot of data, a lot of times gone into those, a lot of thought processes. But some people may feel like, you know, the cake is already baked. But I don't know if that's going to be the reaction of somebody who does not interact with the city all the time, right? You know, somebody who's just in a park and stops to hear about what's going on with the bond, right, is gonna say, oh, that one would be amazing, right? Or, you know what I mean? Am I making sense? It's not. Yeah, me and you.
Okay, Brian.
So I think either way would be good, because then also if you go the other way and you just say, what do you think? Right, then sometimes it's overwhelming to even think about it. And then maybe all those different layers of, you know, the transit line and equity and all of that is not in that person's mind.
Exactly.
It's not
They're
going to
gonna
be.
they're gonna tell you about the project that's near their house, that were
Yep.
the place they
The
use.
one that I
That's
want.
important to them.
Yeah.
And then we are gonna apply the criteria that we think is good criteria. So, because
Support to the community.
it's right, it's a community-wide, it's not an individual. Like I think the sidewalks on Sunday are really important, because that's where I walk to ride the bus. But, you know, I'm usually lonely at that bus stop, you know? It's not the whole community that's there, so it might not be the biggest bang for our buck, right?
Yep.
We need to have a community like that.
So I wonder if we could do both at the same time, or both, and not one exclusive of the other, because the way I understand it, and Julie, you should correct me because my understanding is limited, the way we are sourcing the safer crossings projects, it's cloud sourced. And so I think people could continue to submit ideas through that source, and then we would be able to know that we already have that request in, or we would be able to quantify in some way, this project was referenced 20 times or whatever, right, Julie?
Yeah, that's already an existing
So
option.
it's-
People can go look at it right now.
But it also, I think, requires some geographic boundaries to it requires some specification to the sidewalk or the safer crossing problem, right? So you can't just say, fix McGilchrist. You would have to say something more specific, which I think Julie's going to show us. So my idea would be that we would start now-ish, calling all projects and have a time limit. Some of the neighbors are probably going to want to submit neighborhood specific lists, which is great, they should. And we can put it all into the same tool that's already working for us. And then you all have more time to think about criteria and some of the other data and analysis that we're doing. We could pick a day by which you hope to have a recommended project list. And then that becomes the thing to which we are seeking feedback about the approach, which would be considering all of the data and all of the criteria. So we could do it both ways. In case you missed it, we've been collecting ideas for the last couple of years. Here,
Yeah.
give us yours. And here's the recommended list.
I'm always a fan of doing stuff like this, but my first gut reaction is the people who know and understand the process and who have access to this information and to whatever it is on how we're gonna do the survey are gonna be the ones to get their things in. And we're not gonna hear from the people that we're trying to hear from when we're looking at it through an equity lens. And how, I'm fine doing something like this, but I wanna know, how are we gonna reach those people in those dark areas on those two maps?
Julie, do you want to talk about the pilot for the equity council?
Sure, in a moment, but sorry, I'll get to that in a second. I just wanted to, sort of circle back to one of those early questions I put up there about equity, which is, do we want to, does council want to focus solely or very high percentage on areas that are traditionally underserved? And if that's the case, okay, then as an example, some South Salem or West Salem wards, areas may not get any projects. I mean, the decision is
Out
to
of the
make
buckets.
out of the buckets. If the decision is made to solely do that, and if that decision is made, then does it make sense to go out and ask everybody in South Salem and West Salem what their favorite projects are, or is that, disingenuous because the decision is going to be made not to do that? I'm putting that out there, and partly I'm doing it because we have, the Safe Routes to School grant program that the state runs. Okay, so they, anybody can submit a project that's within any jurisdiction, right? We can apply for projects that are within a mile of any school. However, the way they've done their scoring criteria, don't quote me on this, but it seems like about 70% of the points that you're eligible for are totally tied to the income of the school population. And so you're not going to get a grant if you apply for a pedestrian improvements near Kendall Area Elementary School. So why even apply? So, that's just one context. So the equity.
If I could also just add though, specifically to your question, if there is an interest in creating greater access in some of the populations, the areas in town, we have connections, we have resources we can use to help get that feedback if that's what's desired. But then the Equity Council.
So we're doing a pilot project right now with a group of representatives of traditionally underserved populations to really bring in a very specific equity focus. Now we're doing this right now focused on the potential for displacement from city projects, from zoning. So we make a lot of transportation improvements in a certain area. Are we going to inadvertently cause gentrification or displacement? And we had our first meeting on Tuesday, and I used the example of Fisher Road, just as, I'm like, hey, we have funding, we're going to be coming in and making Fisher Road safer, better. Is that something we should be concerned about from a displacement standpoint? And it was interesting, there is no really great answer. I think, yes, there is a potential, but they still need safe and convenient and nice things. So we're working with this group to try to come up with potential mitigation strategies that eventually will be coming to City Council as part of, I believe, the housing production strategy. But so I think there's thoughts. This is right now a pilot project. We have 3 meetings scheduled. And the last meeting, part of it is to talk about, okay, what is the potential for this group moving forward to help us with other conversations, whether that be about, selecting projects for bond, these buckets, or other transportation related things as we move into the transportation system plan.
Or even just a regular intentional conversation about things that the city is doing and concerns or issues that any one of those groups might have to share with us. So I was imagining after the pilot, if there's interest, we would be looking at like a neighborhood chairs kind of a format quarterly, just a conversation, an intentional conversation.
I would love to sit in on one of those councils.
Yeah, well, I'm interested to know how this came about and how this is the first time.
Which
The Equity Council.
and it was part of the whole climate friendly and equitable communities rule requirements, walkable mixed use areas requirement to focus on equity. So that's really where this came out of.
And I'm seeing, just like the CFAC rulemaking, there is an interest, a requirement that we have these kinds of engagements in really almost every one of our planning efforts. And my concern is that if we, the city, are stopping by, we're going to be exhausting these cultural community partners. And so my hope or expectation is that we could just have an intentional conversation about all the different ways that we're all influencing each other. And instead of, oh, today it's about natural hazard mitigation planning and we need to make sure we're engaging you, and just have a more intentional relationship.
Not the checkbox,
So
but the relationship.
Not the transactional.
So anyway, so I'm trying to circle back to this. I mean, that's part of my question and one. It probably needs some we need probably some high level guidance before we go out to the community and ask them for, we need to know what parameters we're asking. Yes.
I mean, do we start with, say, criteria? I would assume once we get the first one done. Kind of going with the neighborhood traffic.
I was gonna say, I would think we would use that. When we have a great model, I mean, and it's the same kind of work, why would we? Well,
I was thinking that same thing, like, I wanna take these projects and put them through that process.
right,
But I know that process isn't done quite yet. Working out the kinks, but
Where we're at with that now is taking equity. Three different ways, taking some sample projects and saying, okay, we use this equity. Here's what went right to the top. This equity. This is what went right to the top. So you have a feel that thinking should be.
it's basically creating a scoring matrix that kind of takes all the stuff that we've been talking about, and tries to quantify it, so you can actually evaluate some projects or revenue.
But not 300 miles worth.
Right.
So,
Building up what Brian was saying, is there an opportunity to, rather than focusing on individual projects and asking people's input about individual projects, it would be better if we focused on what the criteria is and invite people in, talk about the criteria as opposed to inviting them in to talk about individual projects, and then use the some more rational process for selecting projects.
I was thinking the same thing. That, you know, we need a standardized scoring process, and I think it would be important to have the input from people as we go through and review or modify the existing criteria. I think that's really, really crucial, but we can put some things out there. In terms of equity, I was thinking to develop as part of the scoring strategy to include equity score, where maybe we look at, I'm just coming up with the percentages. We look at the equity map and determine what percentage of the city is greater than 50% non-white, and use that percentage and assign that equity score increase or whatever to that percentage of projects. And the remaining percentage, it wouldn't carry as much weight potentially, as a way to just be more equitable overall and still address all of it. I'm not saying those percentages are accurate, I'm just kind of looking around, but some sort of a process that we can explain and be consistent.
I think it's gonna be important to be consistent.
Oh,
And
yeah.
not just with bond projects, I mean, right, like, we're talking about overall, how do we provide all of these projects and improvements citywide, just on the regular. Yeah, yeah.
It's already put together. We a little different last year, but I think once we get the problem with those. I think all this is good for discussion.
Right, this is, and that's the direction council has given in terms of our equity lines. Conversation with this vote and asking for us, in terms of, you know, a consistent way.
When we have the capital projects equity discussion, or we're firm on that, it would be interesting to see how we could apply it to programs and services.
Yeah, I think sort of piggybacking off, because that's actually the way I've been thinking about this. Having sat through from the public side, many presentations from the city, it's always very helpful when it starts with, here's the criteria that we use. It's not, here's the projects that we use, here's the criteria. And then, you know, so we can use, you know, GIS to play around with that and show, like, under this criteria, if we weight the criteria this way, here's kind of what we end up with. Here's what we look at as priority projects. If we change those criteria around, here's what we end up with. And then getting feedback, I think, on those criteria is to me, was always much more instructive and helpful. Rather than, you know, getting married or tied to a specific project, and then saying, okay, let's fit it under the criteria. That's just my thought.
You have a suggestion on how we proceed?
I think I'm hearing consensus about looking at project criteria. Developing something around project criteria as opposed to looking at individual projects. So,
We would still have an opportunity to submit projects.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
but we need a filter to pass them through. Right now, I'm not sure we have that, particularly with the equity element included in it.
So we have a almost.
Yeah, right.
Well, and I mean, there's an equity element included in the safer crossings. However, that was approved in 2019 and it's 10% of the score. So is that, what we want going forward or not?
I was thinking of the thing-
Neighborhood traffic,
Yeah,
yes.
that's the one I was.
No, I
thinking
know,
of.
but I mean,
There's
that's the thing,
study.
talking about just different ways of looking at things. So,
I think maybe a good next step is to bring that neighborhood traffic model that you have to this group. And so we have people understand and then we can decide, okay, yeah, let's take this out and get feedback.
Can we do some evaluation, Julie, of running it at different levels, 10% level or even 20% or 30%?
That's what we're working on now, we have 3 different levels.
Yeah.
To show us how,
Right,
okay, this is what these different decisions mean.
I mean, we're,
Using this data,
Right.
you have up on the wall.
Yes. That's kind of how that
Right.
model is built.
I mean,
That's kind of the direction.
Right.
and that's built specifically for neighborhood traffic management, so it has, speed and volume, and pedestrian generators and things like that. I don't know if we might want different,
Right.
things added, but from,
Well, I think, this could have different technical requirements, but equity should be the same across. all
Exactly.
categories.
Right. Exactly. But you can basically have the template and then you could, maybe there's this, part A is consistent no matter what the kind of project it is. Part B is variable depending on if it's a safer crossing or if it's a park or if it's a,
and maybe we can develop some things as alternatives. I also sort of envision this as a, wherever we land, it will likely need to be revisited at some point in the future, because this is a rapidly evolving.
yeah, no, it's a living.
So, version 1.0, version, I mean, I can sort of see that.
I got 9 years to do that.
Well, plus we'll learn the first time we use it, like, okay, that was great, but boy, that part of it didn't work. That's just gonna happen. It's just how it works. when you do something like that.
Well,
And then you adjust.
we went to a presentation on Monday by some consultants on how they have looked at environmental justice in their scoring. And I found it interesting because they're using a TDQ model that does not even include race and ethnicity. It just uses poverty and health and some other aspects like that. And so there are a gazillion of different ways of looking at this. And so we have to come up with something that works for us for now
With the actual data that we have.
with the data
'Cause
we
don't always
have
have all the data. that we
and
have.
also keeping it simple that we can do.
Right.
Yes?
I know that in the regular CIP, we have budgeted around $2 million every year for sidewalk repair. Is there some way that we can take that regularly scheduled monies to amplify the work that we're doing here in the bond over the next 10 years?
We have, so the 2 million approximately, actually. So it's kind of like our pay. So it is not going at the same time. Brandon and I yesterday were talking about it. We see that there's going to be a need for that going forward. There's also street. To wrap up the process. But definitely we can tie. Since we get going forward to some extent. And the original thought we had was our city staff are very good at taking the care to make sure we get right for the most part. We hire contractors. They're there to.
One sword.
They have to get there, get the work done, get it as possible.
It's not the same level of customer service.
Not the same level of customer service. You get a lot done. One original thought last year was very extreme areas. It's not so residential. I think there's got to be some. Let me go back to what Julia talked about, I guess, way back. The 1744, that's a 24-year-old list of people that call. So it's not just, I mean, this is a long time, a lot of people calling over. There's also, keeping in mind, some areas of town have constituents who are very active.
Yes.
And they bring a lot of recommendations.
Don't
to-
live in my neighborhood.
Yeah, so we have a lot of recommendations to staff. One of the problems that comes out of that when you start to map it is you'll see these little zones.
Clusters.
Right, there's active citizens, and then other areas of town where people just don't reach out to us. It doesn't mean they don't have
That's why
problems.
we want to do this process,
Yeah.
so we can spread that out, and it's not all focused on the people who are the most vulnerable.
Right.
Have the highest ability to access it.
So
Person
what,
who knows your telephone.
yeah, so what we've done is we've rated those 1,744 customer requests for service based on hazards found there. The 800 number was just a way to kind of pare that back, take out some of the things that, as you alluded to, sometimes people call and maybe it's a concern for them, but the general public would say this isn't an issue, right? So we try to weed out some of the things which are lesser known hazards or minor lists, or maybe it's joint spalling, where maybe it's inconvenient or doesn't look nice, but it's not a barrier to mobility. It's not a barrier for somebody accessing that. So we're trying to pare it back down to 800, map it so we can start to see some zones of interest, right? Apply some of this criteria and have that funnel the conversation rather than try to take that massive amount. It's just too much. That's interesting to see.
So one thing on the equity part. Another thing. You know, I brought these two maps. There are other factors that we look at, you know, including things like, you know, lack of access to a car, English proficiency, disabilities, things like that. There are other layers. But one thing that was interesting at the meeting on Tuesday was we were focusing on displacement, right? Potential for displacement. And so when we went to the group, we had maps, we had all these things up on the walls, and we wanted their input on, okay, this is what the data is telling us, but what do you know that might be different from the data? And so there are certain areas of town that they identified that I probably would have thought of in my head as, you know, being in those areas. And so one of my questions, thoughts, and maybe this is even for moving forward in the future, is, you know, at some point, should we be developing something that has buy-in from them to say, okay, this reflects our understanding as opposed to the data. So like the apartments, for example, that are behind Whitco on Sunnyside. You know, so there's a bunch of apartments in that area, South Salem. And doesn't show up in any of the census tract level data, but they saw that as an area that had potential for displacement. So it's just a question putting out there for, you know, data can only get us so far, that sometimes we might need to take the time to get a broader input and buy-in on what it's telling us.
Yeah, and I think to that point, Julie, like just talking to Nicole Utes in the housing authority, and you can hear from her, she knows the different complexes around town that are falling out of affordability.
Yes.
Because we're in that time period when there was a lot of affordable housing 25, 30 years ago that was developed. And now we're at the end of the lifespan of that. And so we have project falling out of affordability. And those people are all going to be displaced.
Yeah.
And that's a real thing. We have, you know, I think 3 or 4 of them, one that's imminent out in Northeast, and then we have 3 or 4 that are coming right behind it. So those are areas where we know people are about highly likely to be displaced if something doesn't happen. And then you add this on top of it, and then
Yeah, and that was something that they asked us to have a map of next meeting. You know, I think Jimmy Jones was at the meeting, so
Yeah.
he brought that up. That
have a
very
chat with,
complicated.
have a chat with Nicole.
I think we're going to bring somebody from the housing at the next meeting.
Yeah. she'll make that
Well, it was,
the bad news.
I am 100% agreement with you that the data doesn't always play out the way that the lived experience is, and so to be keen into that is really important. We were at NESCA this week, and they were talking about the area in between the elementary school and the Missouri apartments,
Yeah,
and how they had Eunice Kim came out and just walked the streets, and what she gathered from a planning perspective was that this is a neighborhood that walks, and it's not walking for enjoyment, it's walking out of necessity.
right.
And they walk every day, and they do everything by walking. And so there's only those things that you can experience when you're out there,
And the sidewalks are horrible.
and the sidewalks are horrible.
There aren't any sidewalks. It's on the streets.
So it, just case in point, that was
Right.
exactly what happened with Eunice when she went out there, so.
Yeah, and I get nervous, like if, for example, there was a direction, which I don't foresee, but if there was a direction to only focus these buckets in these certain census tracts because they meet certain whatever. Well, it's an example in West Salem, there are definitely some areas that are at risk for displacement that are in need of investment, and they would just be totally out of that picture. And so,
No, I don't think we should be black or white. I think we need to use all of the information to inform the decisions, but it doesn't mean that it's the.
Yeah.
I think there are lots of considerations that go. We go more.
I wanted to go back and amplify one point that Julie made about sort of the opportunities for projects. Student schedule. I think I saw some heads nodding around, not arguing, it's a literal and transparent process we're talking about, but maybe, I guess what I wanted to know is, do you want us to bring back those opportunities to this group while those discussions are going on, so that we can say, yes, this is worth consideration, or no, let's let it go.
No, I definitely want to do that. I mean, given cost escalations in our bond projects, we need to find anytime we can be more efficient and get more bang for our buck, we need to capitalize on it.
I'd want to hear how do they match up with probably what the criteria that we're coming up
Sure.
with. And, bang for the buck.
We can
that
have
sort
that
of thing.
discussion.
So just understand the trade-off that.
Right.
Might not be fully there yet.
Right.
It's kind of see how it's fitting in. I was having the same thoughts. It's, fortunately, our buying power gets worse every year.
Right. So no, I would like to be able to take advantage of that. Like Bob said, we want to definitely keep this.
It's over to the road. There's several opportunities. So those are part of this.
You're talking about like the 17th, the Lancaster part of Silverton Road. When you first started at the Silverton Road, I'm like, it's all in the county. Because in my area, in the county, over there. It's not.
but I mean, look here, sorry, I'm driving this. So we're paving, this blue here. And so there's this gap here, maybe one of these gaps, I don't know. This was paved with the 2008 bond, so that's why it's not in there, but arguably. And then there's a pedestrian crossing. Let's see if I go back.
Well, we just, before you move past it, there at Lansing and Silverton, and Councilor Gonzalez just participated in their Safe Routes to School walk. And so we got to experience walking from, it's like a block, but it was.
Yeah, well, this section
it's the
here,
area in terms of the
Oh my God,
conversation.
yes.
It's a block that's, if I was a grade school kid, I'm not sure I'd be very comfortable out there.
this little section here is asphalt, but it's prime for,
Yeah.
but it has some tricky right of way issues. It's a, commercial business.
Yeah.
The other thing that I want,
1 second, Julie.
Yeah, so what I was gonna move there too, and I think what Alan was touching on is, so as part of that R&R for Silverton Road, we're gonna be addressing ADA ramps as part of that consideration, but sidewalks isn't part of that. We have to come out of that replacement bucket to remove those barriers, so this, to make sure that we could get those kind of thought process brought to you, of why we were selecting those. And from a maintenance standpoint, we get a lot of, so off of highway, and some of those other areas, they put in apartments, and there is people with mobility issues there, that they cannot access transportation services on Portland Road or Silverton Road.
So even though highways off that network, this would be an opportunity to look at that area and say, hey, now we can make a connection between these two major arterials. The only other point you have is where they intersect at Silverton Road. As you move into the neighborhoods, you have no clear connections between those two major arterial routes.
Right.
So I think that what Alan was alluding to, is bringing that to you early so we can have a conversation. It may not get fully embedded through this whole process in order to jump on when that construction takes place.
Change this up.
So it would be, yes.
So
Yeah.
it sounds like the equity lens conversation and how that would work is being built through the neighborhood traffic management conversation. It sounds like there are a lot of existing criteria that are being used for the other aspects of projects that could be brought to bear to help analyze or weight these projects. I wonder if we have a sense of when we could return with that kind of feedback, because if we're waiting to do community outreach until we have the criteria nailed, there's also the other side is some of these need to get going. So do you think that we would be ready with that criteria conversation at our next meeting, now that we have kind of the scope of what criteria we're going to be looking at if we meet every month? Is that doable?
So we're meeting next week to see where.
Potentially. I mean, I think one thing that we may not have it nailed down to an actual storing, but I think it would be important to identify the ones tied to quick bond projects, and then give an update at least on what the neighborhood traffic management plan, the equity scoring, and maybe get a little bit more on that. I'm not sure we're gonna be fully baked.
Yeah,
but I
but
don't
you're
think-
far enough along now to at least give this
Oh, yeah.
group, but they'll
Yeah.
get the flavor of it, and it may not be done, but it's.
And what I would need to be able to start messaging what the criteria would be is being able to take that equity idea, not the score, but just being able to say what equity means, what you are considering in sort of a parenthetical way. So just being able to articulate broadly what kinds of things, what kinds of things you want to be considering. And I think we're saying, these are the criteria that the committee is going to be considering when evaluating projects. Let us know how you think about those. And do you have any project ideas that you think would meet those that you want to submit today? It's twofold outreach starting after you meet in April. Yes?
I want to interject for 1 second. I know we have about 2 minutes left, and I really need to end the meeting on time today. So I want to make sure that, is there anything beyond this that we discuss? I don't see anything on the agenda. Okay,
That's
so
why I'm
reacting to Courtney, does that sound? Okay,
I was brought one other thought.
yeah,
Trying to wrap this up. If we have a pavement R&R project, so we're with ADA grants, let's say, fortunately, money left over, some sidewalk as well. I don't think it'd be a problem to use that same project. Or ADA grants to sidewalk and go along it without saying, no, it's not gonna be a sidewalk.
And that's why I think you have the criteria, because you can rank and you can pull the next one down that you couldn't fund if you're able to leverage, right?
yes. Plenty of projects in the bucket. Should we save sufficient? Great.
I have one more quick comment.
Yeah.
And I know we need to end real quick. I just was wondering, with the national focus on transportation infrastructure, if there are new grants talking about there that address things like this, our underserved communities, the safer routes to schools, climate infrastructure, transit proximity, things that might help us have more money to work with. And I don't want to talk about that right now, but that's a thought I was thinking about that kind of ties into some of this too, where can you leverage other funds?
Okay, great. Anything else for the good of the order? Thank you all for your time. Thank you for being here. Thank you, staff. Good work.